Every vampire in this story was turned for the same reason. Not because they were special, not because it was destiny, but because someone else was lonely, and turning someone was easier than fixing themselves. And that doesn't sound like a horror story. That sounds like what people do to each other in relationships. And that's why the show slaps. AMC's Interview with a Vampire is honestly one of the best things on television right now, so it's really surprising to not see many people talking about it. And I want to change that, because the show about vampires isn't actually about vampires.
What'd you say to me?
Hi all, I'm Eric. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new here, welcome back. At this point, I've made a few videos about TV series, particularly shows that took something transgressive and sanded it down to something more palatable, mainstream, and boring. Heather's, Cruel Intentions, Fatal Attraction all failed to honor their source material. One turned into a bad parody of itself, the other forgot what made the original special in the first place, and the last was just bad. Like, categorically terrible. Interview with a Vampire does what none of those shows could do. Be good. And it's good because it takes a known mythology, a story already adapted to the big screen in 1994, and makes a series of changes so significant that the show becomes something the original genuinely couldn't have been. Louis de Pointe-du-Lac is now a black Creole man in 1910's New Orleans. His relationship with Lestat isn't subtext anymore. It's very much the center of the show, explicitly and unambiguously. Claudia is also black, and the interview framing is updated. Daniel Malloy is an older man, more combative, sharp, who has his own complicated history with this story, and the series establishes this setting as the second attempt at this interview, 49 years after the first one that would have followed more closely with the story of the film. And every one of those changes is immensely consequential to the story because they end up dictating the course of the story. New Orleans, 1910, is a very specific place to set a love story. It is a city at a time when being gay was punishable by law, where an interracial relationship between a black and a white man is not just frowned upon, but genuinely dangerous. The darkness they live in is not only supernatural, but also historical. And making it historical makes this real in a way that changes the weight of every scene. The 1994 film was about vampires. This show is about people. I wanted to avoid a full recap of the show because it is quite dense, and it's honestly such a visual feast you'd be better off at watching it firsthand. Instead, I want to touch on what I think the show's main thesis is. Its main argument. An argument that runs 3 times with 3 different couples, each one a variation of the same question. What happens when you bring someone into your darkness, not because you want them to be free, but because you need them to stay? And by the 3rd time, and only the 3rd time, someone finally gets it right. So let's start at the beginning, right after you subscribe down below, because it's free, and it helps, and you will look so much cuter after you do it. Let's talk about Lestat, because Lestat is not a villain. I want to be clear about that up front because the show eventually makes it clear as well. Lestat is a man. A vampire, yes, but functionally a man that has been alone for a very long time. And when it goes on long enough, loneliness can become your personality. It starts shaping every decision you make, every relationship you enter, every person you choose to pull close. He says it himself early on. He tells Louis, "There is one thing about being a vampire that I most fear above all else, and that is loneliness. You can't imagine the emptiness, a void stretching out for decades at a time. You take this feeling away from me, Louis. We must stay together and take precaution and never part." And that speech is doing a lot of work, because on the surface level, it does sound like a love confession. And in Lestat's mind, it probably is. And my toxic ass fell for it, obviously. Hindsight is 2020, and I am trying to engage seriously with the series themes, but watching it, I was under his spell. I too wanted Lestat to court me and to look at me with those striking eyes and that jawline. Who needs that much muscle in their mouth? No. The thing I like about Lestat the most is his very masculine body, his very masculine frame and face, and then his very flamboyant personality. He is in touch with his femininity, and he's not afraid to explore it. But listen to what he's actually saying. He's not saying, "You make me happy." He's saying, "You fix this very real issue that I have, which is loneliness. And for that, you can never leave me." And that distinction between being loved and being needed is what their entire relationship is built on. And it starts before the turning even happens. Lestat doesn't offer to turn Louis straight away. First, he watches him from afar. Then he befriends him. Then he amazes him with these unspecified gifts. And the thing about Louis is that he is an established figure in New Orleans. He runs businesses and he has money, all left from his father after he passed in 1905. 1905. But even that power comes at a cost. He runs brothels, which are the only industry a man like himself could go into in a place like this. The problem is the backlash he faces at home when his morals are put into question because of the nature of the businesses he runs. The only social power he has is seen as the exception by society, and that same social power is frowned upon by his family. He says it himself.
Thank you, sir. It was the call and response of my entire life.
So by the time Lestat makes his move, Louis has lost everything. He's lost his brother Paul, he's lost his family's respect, and he's lost his faith. And Lestat, knowing that Louis is approaching a breaking point, drives him insane. He drives him insane, kills 2 priests in front of him, and then offers him the power to stop pretending like he should be grateful for just existing. I can take away that sorrow, Louis. I can swap this life of shame, swap it out for a dark gift and a power you can't begin to imagine. A life of shame, that's what he calls it. And Louis is grieving, he's exhausted, he's about to go crazy, and Lestat is really pretty. It's really, like, I would have said yes on the spot. I would have, for sure. I learned nothing with this series. I'm here breaking down the themes, and I'm here like deconstructing what the series means, but I am the problem too. I am toxic. And I would have said yes. I like right now. If this was a thing, if this was real, I'd say yes. Fuck being human. Let's live in the night. Ugh. So I hear you wondering, what exactly does Lestat want from all of this? He wants Louis to stay. That's it. That's the whole thing. Everything else, the manipulation, the control, the jealousy, the cruelty, it all flows from this one very need. He wants Louis to stay, to choose to stay. The problem is Lestat can't create the conditions in which Louis can choose freely to stay. So instead, he manufactures that dependency. He turns Louis and then controls the terms of what Louis's new life looks like, what they hunt, where they live, what Louis is allowed to feel about all of it. He turns him into a vampire and then spends years being furious that he's not living up to the standards of a vampire that Lestat has imposed on himself. And those things also play into the dynamic of the powerful white man and his slave. Louis even says at one point that being called a fledgling sounds a lot like a slave. And even as Louis continues growing his business, whenever they go out of town or they meet new people and they go networking, Louis has to stand back and act like the servant, like the person who's just there assisting Lestat, the face of the business, because he's a white man. Another dynamic that means a lot more to Louis than it means to Lestat, because Lestat never has to take himself down a peg, no matter where he walks. He can always be a confident white man because the world was built for him. And the jealousy, oh my god, the jealousy. There's a moment in episode 3 of season 1 where Louis reconnects with an old friend, Jonah, someone he's known since childhood, someone he's frolicked around with. Frolicked? Is that even the right? They fooled around a couple times. And at this point, Louis and Lestat are free to sleep with other people. So Lestat, who's been following them, who's been listening from a distance, completely loses it and says, "I heard your hearts dancing."
I heard your hearts dancing!
It's a very aggressively delivered poetic line, which serves as a window into exactly how Lestat's mind works. He's not angry because Louis lied to him, he's angry because Louis's heart responded to someone else. And at this point, Lestat has decided that Louis's emotional responses belong to him. This idea of possession. Louis's capacity for feeling is a resource that only Lestat should have access to. That's controlling and toxic. But it's also not that simple. Because Lestat tries, you know, he genuinely, repeatedly, inadequately tries. There are moments, small ones, fleeting ones, where you can see Lestat reaching for something better than himself and just not quite making it. Always coming up a little short. And Louis at one point reflects on this and even says, "He was my murderer, my mentor, my lover, and my maker. All of these things at once. He didn't choose me to be his doormat. I knew he enjoyed it when I fought back." That last part matters, okay? Lestat doesn't want a passive Louis. He wants a Louis who pushes back, who argues, who refuses, because that Louis is present, engaged, choosing to be in the room. I've always said that if two people in a relationship never argue about anything, something could be wrong, might be wrong, is probably wrong. Arguing keeps the relationship alive because it means both people care enough to solve things. If they never ever argue, they're either incestuous twins who have the same personality, or they're just pretending. In his own broken way, Lestat wants to be chosen by Louis. The real tragedy of Lestat is that he's just loving enough for Louis to stay, but not loving enough for Louis to be truly happy. And the thing is, they're not even hiding the same things. And I think it's that extra layer of depth that the show adds that really frames the complexities of their relationship. Lestat is a white European vampire who has been alive for 2 centuries. When he decides to be reckless, when he kills someone too publicly, or makes a scene, or draws attention to himself, it's a choice he can afford to make. Louis doesn't have that luxury. Louis is a black man in 1910s New Orleans who has spent his entire life learning to make himself palatable to people with more power than him. He knows how to be charming and non-threatening and graceful because he's had to. So now he's hiding his vampirism, he's hiding his queerness, he's hiding the fact he's in an interracial relationship, all of it simultaneously in a city where any one of those things could get him killed. There's a scene, and it's brief, like maybe 15 seconds, where Lestat is reading a newspaper at Jackson Square and starts romanticizing the plaza as a piece of French heritage. And Louis very quietly tells him that square was where runaway slaves were executed, where their heads were placed on the gates as a warning. And Lestat goes silent, because there is no possible response to that. And it's another scene that does a lot of work because it's not an argument or a fight. It's just Louis reminding Lestat that they're not standing on the same ground, even being vampires. And there's a lot of this conversation of them being equals in the relationship, not just as vampires, but as partners. From the jump, they're not on equal grounds. And it's something that Louis is constantly reminded of because he is the one who suffers the brunt of their inequality. Did that make sense? I hope it did. Louis is always more exposed and more vulnerable, and Lestat, consciously or not, benefits from that, because having Louis more vulnerable makes him more dependent on Lestat, the experienced vampire who's been at this for 150 years. By the time we get to season 2, the relationship has evolved into something that the show has refused to resolve cleanly, and I respect it for it. I think the show does a really good job at laying out several different terms of several different POVs, and it doesn't necessarily try to put anyone on any moral high ground. It does very much leave everything open-ended, and it's up to you to decide who you see as the villain, who you see as the hero, and what you deem acceptable or not. But because we're talking about a story where vampires literally have to kill one person a night at least to survive, the morals are kind of out the window. It's not really a story where you can expect them to act in the same moral standards as we would normally. There is a version of Lestat, an older, diminished, living in squalor in New Orleans version by the time Louis finds him again, who has genuinely reckoned with what he did. Not enough, though. Never quite enough. But something real did happen to him in all these years apart. It's not a character you should romanticize, but it's also a fictional character. It's a vampire. What am I saying? And decades later, Louis is narrating this story to Daniel Malloy. In the movie, he narrates it, and Lestat is a villain. There's no redeeming qualities about him. And in the series, in their first interview 49 years ago, that was the same framing that Louis gave Lestat. Except now, 49 years after their first attempt, Louis is a lot more nuanced about his story. And he even says of those early years, "The earth beneath me always felt liquid." This is a man describing the most alive he has ever felt. And the show holds both things at once, the harm and the aliveness, without asking you to choose between them. Because the thing about Louis is he stays. He chooses repeatedly to remain in his relationship. The show doesn't let him off the hook for that, and your reading of the show shouldn't either. Because Louis isn't just a passive recipient of Lestat's choices. He is at one point a participant, or becomes one. And whatever the interview is, whether it's a confession or performance or processing therapy or an odyssey of recollection, as they call it, it is Louis still circling the same question he's been circling for 100 years. Did Lestat love him? Or did Lestat love needing him? And I think the show thinks, that to Lestat, that was the same thing. And now on to the worst thing that Louis has done in the entire series. The worst thing Louis does is rescue a girl from a burning building, a 14-year-old girl, and then ask Lestat to turn her into a vampire just to assuage his grief. Assuage? Is that a word? I hope it's a word. By the time Claudia enters this story, Louis has lost almost everything. And the only thing that he had up until now, his thriving businesses, are now also gone because he is a black man. And if the city fails or starts failing, the first businesses that are going to go under are Black-owned businesses. He is by any measure a man in free fall. So the fire in the building is the result of a murder that he commits as revenge for the mistreatment that he gets for being a Black business owner. He kills this white guy and that he puts his whole body on display and makes it very obvious that it was him. So riots break out, fires happen, and he hears a girl about to die in a fire and he rescues her. And the show is very careful not to make this feel sinister in the moment. Like, Louis is being Louis. He sees a girl who's in danger and he saves her. He's doing the right thing for all intents and purposes. But then he asks Lestat to turn her, and he doesn't ask her. And he does admit to himself years later,
We made her out of remorse, out of selfishness.
out of selfishness. That's his word, not mine. Claudia's turned because Louis was grieving and she was there. That's it. That's the whole reason. She doesn't get a choice or an explanation. She is just plucked from a bad situation and shoved right back into another one. Yes. And what exactly does forever look like for Claudia? Well, she's 14 years old, in a body that will never age, in a world, remember where we are, 1910s, New Orleans, she is a Black girl. She's in a position where she will never be seen as an adult, not by the world. For a long time, she's not even seen as an adult by Louis or Lestat, who continue treating her as half daughter, half living doll, like a project, a distraction from the problems they refuse to solve in their own relationship. She figures this out because, of course, she does. Claudia is, by no stretch of the imagination, one of the most astute characters of the show. That's because she had to be. So that's the cycle. Lestat turns Louis to fix his loneliness. Louis has Lestat turn Claudia to fix his grief. Nobody asks, nobody thinks about what it costs the other person. And in the moment, the person making that decision genuinely feels like they're doing the right thing, which is so much worse because, like, when you do something bad and you know it's bad, at least you can own up to it and be like, yeah, I knew it was bad and I can take full responsibility. But when you do something genuinely thinking it's the right thing and then you realize that it's actually the worst possible thing, that's like really bad. Because you did something really bad, but it wasn't intentional. So, like, how can we hold you accountable? Not to say that, you know, they did this completely unknowingly. I think they're all still a little bit responsible, but it comes from the intention, I guess, rather than whatever the end result ends up being. That's the pattern the show is tracking, which then carries on through Europe, the war, through Paris, until someone finally breaks it. Paris, de théâtre de vampires, saison 2. Paris, the Theater of Vampires. Season 2. At a certain point in the season, Claudia has been in this theater for a while now, performing as Baby Lou, a character that the Coven has assigned to her because she is a vampire trapped in a child's body, and they make a spectacle out of her. And people really resonate with it, and they start coming in droves. They completely revive the art of theater, if you will. And then she meets Madeline. Madeline is a dressmaker, an outcast labeled a Nazi collaborator by her neighbors for a wartime relationship she has her own complicated feelings about. The first time Claudia walks into the shop, Madeline tells her that womanhood will happen soon enough. And Claudia says, I never thought about choosing to pretend. Life hasn't been kind enough to allow me that. And that exchange tells you everything about why these two find each other. Both of them misrepresented by the world, neither of them what they appear to be. And they recognize that in each other almost immediately. And what grows between them is the first genuinely mutual relationship in this entire story. Two people who actually see each other, who choose each other's company because of who the other person is, not because of the gap that they fill. And when the question of turning comes up, Claudia lays out the truth in front of Madeline and gives her a choice whether or not she wants to become a vampire, her companion. And Madeline, who's grown disillusioned with the injustices of the world, chooses Claudia. That's it. That's the whole difference. The thing that none of these old century vampires could do is ask, hey, do you want this? And the turning of Madeline is such a contrast from all the other turnings that we've witnessed. This one is gentle. There's no desperation in it. There's no urgency. There's no grief being processed. There's no pain. We even hear Louis describe how when he was draining Madeline, he could feel her thoughts and her feelings for Claudia, and he could see Claudia the way Madeline saw Claudia, and Madeline saw Claudia. You know what I mean? Like, she could really see. They saw each other. Like, we see each other. You know what I mean? Claudia and Madeline were the only ones to ever do the vampire bond correctly. The only ones. In a story full of ancient, powerful, centuries-old vampires, the only one who could get it right was the woman trapped in a child's body. Figure that. And then the show kills them. That's not a spoiler. The movie's from 1994. It's been 32 years. Oh my God, it's been 32 years. It's been 32 years since 1994. This is crazy. Claudia, Madeline, Louis are captured by the Coven and they're put on trial for the crimes that they committed against vampires, for breaking laws, ancient laws that they were never aware of in the first place. All of the rules they have broken because of Lestat in some way or another. And Madeline is given a choice at the trial. She can join the Coven and live. All she has to do is abandon Claudia. Because technically Madeline didn't do anything wrong. She was the one turned. She didn't know about any law. She was a human. She didn't have any laws to break in the first place. And I think this is the moment the show has been building towards, even if the show doesn't know it. Claudia expects Madeline to go. She spent her entire existence being failed by people who supposedly loved her. And she even waves at Madeline to say yes, to accept. But Madeline chooses Claudia, which is as beautiful as it is sad, because they are sentenced to death for it, and they die together, burned alive at sunrise in each other's arms. And before she goes, Claudia, the girl who was failed by everyone, who never got to grow up, who figured the one thing the entire story is trying to say, starts singing and looks at her father in those very, very last moments. And that was really sad. I've never cried watching someone die in a CGI death, but I did. I did. Yes, I did. And it's the one couple who did everything right, who had consent, who built a companionship for real, that are killed, that are punished for it. And you know why? Because life's not fair, okay? You don't get protection in the real world just because you found love. You think you're special? Fuck you. Kidding, sorry. But it is really sad when she dies, and that is like the emotional toll that completely like damages Louis. I do want to talk about Armand because, listen, I don't like Armand, okay? I do not like Armand, and if you like Armand, I don't know what to tell you. After Lestat, Louis needed something different. He doesn't know exactly what it is, but he knows what it doesn't look like Lestat. And then he meets Armand, and Armand listens. Armand is patient. Armand is ancient and controlled and intellectually matches Louis in a way Lestat, for all his charm, never quite did. He doesn't rage. He doesn't humiliate. He doesn't scream about hearts dancing. After everything Louis's been through, Armand looks like relief. But let's talk about what Armand really wants. Because here's the thing about control, right? The loud, obvious one is very easy to spot. When Lestat is controlling and possessive, we can very easily recognize it because he's so boisterous and loud and obvious about it. Armand is different. Armand is more cerebral, if you will, or architectural even. He dresses his concern with soft words and kindness and calm. And through the entire show, you can always feel like something isn't right, until eventually we find out in season 2, spoiler alert, that Armand has been editing Louis's memories. So the story that Louis has been telling Daniel is not entirely his own. There's a big theme of recollection in the series. How well do we remember certain details, and how sometimes Louis gets things wrong. And it irks Daniel Malloy to the point where he's constantly fighting back, offering pushback like, no, you said this, now you're saying that. You're changing your version of events. So eventually in season 2, we find out that Louis's memories have been tampered with by Armand. At one point, he says to Louis, if you want the insanity back, if you want an escape from this prison of empathy I've locked you away in, all you had to do was ask, Louis. Prison of empathy, that's what he calls it. He's taken Louis's ability to feel the full weight of his own experience, you know, his grief, his rage, his guilt about Claudia, and he's dampened it. He's changed it. He's also changed details that make him look better. Details that convinced Louis to choose Armand 70 years prior. And that's like a reworked version of what Lestat used to do, because like Lestat took Louis's freedom loudly, whereas Armand is taking it out quietly. But they're both doing it. That's the thing. Louis's been fucked over by all these fucking vampires, man. Now here's where it really gets interesting, and I think it's something that the show does that I think is quite brilliant and underrated. In season 2, as Louis and Armand are building their relationship, Louis continuously sees Lestat, or a hallucination of Lestat. And this vision of him is notably nothing like Lestat. He's easy, he's accommodating, he's understanding. He's the version of Lestat that Louis always wanted, conjured up and placed in the middle of a relationship with someone else. With Armand, who we find out is also Lestat's ex, which is just, I mean, vampires and gays, you know, they all date each other. Keep it in the family. Now, the obvious reading here is that Louis is haunted by Lestat, perhaps because he received Lestat's blood when he was turned, and now some part of Lestat will always live inside of him. That's the easy assumption. The more interesting one is that Louis is using his hallucination or his vision of Lestat as a vehicle for his own thoughts, the thoughts that he has but is afraid of admitting to himself. It's Louis' own resistance and skepticism to this relationship that he's building with Armand. And that's not a man who's healed. That's a man who's found a more sophisticated way of avoiding healing, of avoiding dealing with things. I haven't gone into any forums and I haven't seen any of the fandom discourse online about this show, but something tells me that there's people that believe Armand is better for Louis and there's people that believe Lestat is better. I imagine this would be maybe like an Edward versus Jacob kind of thing from Twilight. Is that a thing? If you're part of the fandom, let me know down below. And if so, whose team are you? Are you team Armand or team Lestat? Spoiler alert, they're both awful in very different ways. So really pick your poison. Lestat might be a little bit more awful, actually. No, I don't know. It's tricky. It's a different kind of awful. I know who I'm picking because I'm a dumbass who has a type. Who are you picking? So what is the show really saying under all of these vampires and beautiful set designs and incredible costume designs and brilliant acting all around? Seriously, the worst of the actors is still pretty great. The show is saying to me that this isn't love. This is selfishness. This is possession. Every turning in this story is an act of selfishness. And to be clear, the show tells you that the love is real, right? It doesn't pretend that love isn't real. Lestat genuinely loves Louis, and Louis genuinely loves Lestat in a very broken, insufficient way. But you know, it's still love. It's just bad, toxic, unhealthy love. Do I want them to end up together? Yes, because I'm the problem. Season 3 is coming in June, and it's going to adapt The Vampire Lestat. It's another book, and it tells the story from Lestat's perspective. It's kind of like 50 Shades of Grey, where she... Did you guys know that E.L. James wrote like a trilogy from Mr. Grey's perspective? Don't ask me how I know that, but I know that much, yeah. So there's a book that tells the story from Lestat's version, and that's going to be Season 3, and it's also going to carry on the story from present time. So you know what? There's still hope that Louis and Lestat will end up together or, you know, in an open relationship. I don't care. The pilot was really intense and it really sold their connection and their relationship. So I do understand if people are like standing them for real. I wouldn't stand this relationship for real, but it is fiction, so who fucking cares? It's fun and it's really good. It's a really good show. I was doing research for this and I was shocked at how little content there actually is around this show. So you know what, guys, let's get watching, because season 3 is coming in just a couple months, and I'll be back once the whole season is out, because we need to you know, come back to this, and hopefully, because it'll only be one season by that point, I'll be able to do a more thorough recap of every episode. But for now, I think those are the main themes, and what a brilliant vampire show that deals with so many complex themes of love, possession, relationships. And it just occurred to me now, like, wasn't the best movie of the year, according to everyone but the Oscars, a movie about vampires that told a very human story, rich human story. And here we have a series about vampires that does exactly the same thing. Isn't that just great? I love it when horror movie shows people what it's possible when you have smart storytelling and dark themes that anchor the real themes the story is exploring. I've had enough coffee for today. I don't know where I'm going with this, but thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this video, make sure to leave it a like down below. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Click that bell notification so you never miss a future upload from me. Follow me on all my socials down below. And for the last time, maybe the first time, are you Team Armand or Team Lestat? And until next time, stay safe, stay sane, stay stupid, and stay stuttering. Bye, guys.